All right, and we are live following a heartbreaking Dolphins loss. They fall 28-27 or at the hands of the Arizona Cardinals. A last second field goal uh, from Arizona seals the deal. Where do we start with this one? There is a lot to talk about here as I welcome Coach Eric Smith to the post-game show. Thank you so much for doing this on as short of notice as this has been. Um, I'm gonna cede the floor to you and let you go ahead and share some of your immediate reaction before I go ahead and say some of the things that I'm gonna go ahead and say about this game.
Yeah, I mean, so my immediate reaction, I didn't feel like we committed to the run game nearly enough offensively. There were too many drives where we would run the ball once and didn't have great success with it, and then we went straight to two, three passes in a row. Considering that was what we have leaned on of late, and it's gone so well, it only made sense to continue to lean on that even in to his return while he got his feet under him. My expectation for this game was that Tua was going to come out and be efficient. Not a huge game, which is not what we got out of him, but just come out there and be efficient, which I felt he did for the most part. Um, so I was disappointed that we didn't see the commitment to the run game that we had before. Defensively, I don't know how much longer we can sit there and watch David Long out there. I mean, just over and over again, getting beat in the pass game, in the run game. Like he's just on skates out there. He's missing tackles. It's just happening way too much. And I obviously don't want to, a loss is never on one player, but it's hard to pinpoint a player that is playing worse than he is right now. And it's not like in the past where we haven't had other linebackers that could play. Like, I don't know why Anthony Walker wasn't out there more, but we have a good option behind him that there's no reason that he should continue to stay on the field. The blown coverages, we're struggling with tight ends, seems like every week thing. And then mobile quarterbacks. Like my hope was that facing Anthony Richardson last week would be kind of a primer for Kyler Murray and that they would do a better job containing him. And that obviously wasn't the case. I mean, how many times do they seem to have, just free run at him, including that last play. They converted that last third down. Like Marcus May has a clean shot on him and completely whiffs, letting him, convert the first down. So I guess right now I'm just kind of numb to the whole thing. It's hard to see the season turning around from where it is now. Especially when you consider that Buffalo's coming to town next week. I mean, winning this week, we could have said that, hey, we're knocking off some rust and that, we can try to go out there and compete with the Bills. But, after watching them struggle against the Cardinals, struggle again against a mobile quarterback, and then we've got one of the best mobile quarterbacks in the league, while we're going up there, but we're playing him next week. And I don't know, it's hard to see the optimism right now. And that's a tough thing for me because I'm a pretty optimistic fan.
Yeah, I mean, David Long hasn't always been this bad in the Miami
No.
Dolphins uniform. So I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with that, but he continues the long tradition. The first two names that came to mind watching David Long today were Philip Wheeler and Dannell Ellerbe. Because that's really what it kind of looked like out there, and it's in it what it would be an uncharacteristic thing for David Long's tenure. It was really just an awful defensive performance. I think what you're getting at with the mobile quarterback thing is an interesting point because I feel like the difference between a guy like Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray is that Anthony Richardson moves in the pocket to run. Kyler Murray at this point moves in the pocket to pass.
Yeah, that's
And
scary.
it's not something that this defense was prepared for. They tried to send pressure, and when they sent pressure, they got burned. And when they tried to drop back, the defensive line couldn't get any pressure with four, and so they would get burned there. There just wasn't any right answers for this defense tonight or today. I felt like the secondary wasn't terrible because of what happened with the front seven and kind of just being asked to cover for forever, really. Um, you look at a lot of those crossing patterns to Marvin Harrison Jr. towards the end of the game and what they started to get going there. But beyond the defense, I do want to talk a little bit about the offense because I do see that there's some, you know, rumblings out there. Well, Tua didn't make a difference, and this and that, and I categorically disagree with that. I think he did make a difference in this game, because let's be honest, this is like 38-10 if he's not playing, with the way that this was going. It's not even about the fumbles, right? Firstly, the safety, it was a pretty bad snap by Brewer as well. Could to have caught it, absolutely. But there's blame going both ways on that one. There were multiple times when I thought Tua did well, especially on that last drive. That 3rd and 12 throw to Jonnu Smith with the pocket collapsing on him was really solid. The one throw that I think he would want back, and I said it in the moment, was the screen pass to Achan on that last drive, because they got the look from Arizona that they wanted. They got the all out pressure. If that ball gets to Achan, granted you can't really see. We'll have to see the all 22 to see what's in front of him directly. But it sure looked like he was going to go ahead and have a lot of space in front of him had he been able to catch that ball.
Yeah.
They ran the football really effectively. The offense generally wasn't the problem in this one. You can go back to the safety, and I think everybody rightfully will. But unfortunately, I think everybody's looking for a scapegoat on that play, when I think that's just the case where, it's on both guys, really. It's not all on Tua. It's not all on Brewer there. That's just what happens when you haven't played in 4 or 5 weeks. And I know nobody wants to hear that. But those things, they happen. And the defense, which had been keeping you in a lot of these games the last 4 weeks, if they had played even 60-70% as well as they had the last 3 or 4 weeks, they win this game. Yeah. They do. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, this was all to his fault, or anything like that. I thought he played pretty well, all things considered. Yeah. Nick brings this up. 27 points, you should be able to win. That's just what it is in the NFL, especially with the reputation and the way that this defense had been playing early on. It's got to be enough to win.
Yeah, I don't think that Tua would have been the reason that we won the game, but I also don't think that Tua is the reason we lost the game. I think that Tua is, a big part of the reason that we were in this game. I don't think we, score as many points as we did without him when we look at the quarterback play that we've had in the past. So the quarterback play that we had today was way better than what we've had over the past few weeks, but it's not what we have come to expect from Tua. I think that was predictable. There was a tweet that was sent out before doing a study on quarterbacks returning from concussions, and it's fairly predictable that a quarterback returning from a concussion is not going to have even an average game. So I think that, there's a little extra heat on Tua because there's always heat on Tua. But I don't think that what he put out there was anything different than what I expected. As far as the safety, like you said, there's blame on both sides of that, and the snap issues is something that I've brought up in the past, in the sense that we've kind of flirted on the edge of a bunch of these this year. And it was a big thing with Connor Williams last year, and we've had several that were off target that the quarterbacks have been able to corral through the first 6 games of the season or whatever. So they've been kind of flirting on the edge of that. So it's not, again, that one again is not a huge surprise that it happened. It sucks the way that it happened. It sucks that it ended up in a safety. But it's not super surprising.
So, I find myself kind of with a little bit less to say this week, because it's just such a departure from what we've seen the last few weeks, because of the fact that it's been the offense. The offense has been what we've had to talk about the last 4 weeks. And really, I mean, sure, we can overanalyze the safety, and we can talk about even the other botched snaps, but truthfully, I think that both of those set of downs turned into first downs anyways on the other botched snaps. So I don't think that those mattered literally whatsoever. It's just really deflating when you have a game where, and I think that it speaks to the outsized expectations that this team had for Tua coming back. They really did want him to be the savior in this one. And as I welcome Mr. Chad Rodenbaum to the show, welcome in. We are currently commiserating over this Dolphins loss. The offense is pretty good, not very good, not great, but pretty good. And the defense shows up with their worst performance of the year, can never get both sides of the football playing well, as has been the story for the Miami Dolphins the last 20 years. I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, kind of talk about your reaction to this one here. Just snap right off the game-winning field goal.
Were you asking me, Eric?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. I had my mic was just cutting, or my volume was cutting off there. My snap reaction to the game, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough call, because you could see some difficulties on the defense that were frustrating. I thought that they were pretty slow to adjust to McBride. He burned David Long Jr. multiple times over and over, and it pretty much was the go-to for the Cardinals, was they knew they had a matchup. And it did surprise me as we got into the later aspects of that game that they didn't have somebody like, even if you use Ramsey, like, you needed to take that player away from the Cardinals and make him do something else. It also is tough to see them leaving Chop Robinson in at the end of the game there, because I think people don't want to say it because he was first round pick. He's a very bad run defender. He's a liability, and I saw him multiple times just getting blown off the ball. And he's a good situational pass rusher, but he's not an every down defensive end. And I don't think Chris Greer probably wants to admit that yet. But so some of that stuff on defense was tough to watch. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the same old stuff. And I suppose that's a little bit reflective on Mike McDaniel as well. And we have snapping issues. Again, that snapping issues really hurt us this game. And we probably win this game relatively easy if we don't have the snap for a safety in that game. So it's stuff like that. At what point is it like, well, it's just bad luck? We haven't played a clean game all year, whether it's the penalties and some of this stuff's a mystery to me. We're down to the critical aspect of that game, and here we are on the 50-yard line with 6 minutes left, and that whole drive, that whole time, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle don't touch the football, and we're trying to throw a short pattern in out in the flat to Julian Hill, who's just hurt this team time and time again. I don't even understand why he's playing. And at critical times in the game, why are we trying to get the ball to Julian Hill? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think Mike McDaniel is always thinking like, I'm going to outsmart you, versus get the ball into the hands of your best players at the critical times of the game. And, you know, I think they knew it was coming. I think everybody in the stadium knew that Kyler Murray was going to try to run for a first down or they were going to kick a field goal at the end of that game. And he pulled it off. It wasn't that Miami didn't try to defend it. It was just the Cardinals saying, all right, we're going to try to win it with the best player on our team right now and let Kyler Murray try to win this game. And Mike McDaniel doesn't do that. And there's been other games, granted, Tua isn't playing, where we're throwing a bomb down the middle like Tanner Connor. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, why is these players losing the game? And the other thing from a personnel standpoint, and this has to come from Stephen Ross, I'm starting to wonder, like, why, like, you see a guy like Titus Bowser, and I'm not saying Titus Bowser should be the guy playing. Why is he playing? Like, we drafted Mohamed Kamara. He's been on this team all offseason. He's been paid. You've been paid your coaches to take care of him. Whether that's Braylon Sanders or Eric Exukoma, these guys are on the team for years and they're being drafted. They're being paid to stay on the team. But the moment you have injuries, no, it's Robbie Chosen who's in there playing like 2 weeks off the street. Or we're trading for Dubose and you're watching them screw up because they haven't even been on the team. And this is just another example of the moment we have an injury, the moment Jalen Phillips goes down, we're going to go grab somebody off the street and they're going to be playing right away. And I have to ask, you know, if I'm Ross, like, does that mean like the bottom 10 players on our roster really aren't NFL players? Like, what's the point of putting 2 years into Braylon Sanders if he can't play? Or what's the point of drafting Mohamed Kamara if he's not going to play? And maybe Bowser's better than him, but I see that over and over. And it's got to be a disturbing trend of the amount of players on this football team that end up in the starting lineup or on the field that have been on the team for literally a week, you know, and no bigger case than the backup quarterback. You know, we get into the situation where, you know, Skylar Thompson probably is going to be gone after the season. I think everybody would agree with that. They can't afford to keep him as the backup quarterback, but you know, it's Tyler Huntley. It's a guy off the street again that's playing. And, you know, maybe they shouldn't have cut Mike White, or maybe they should have went and got Mike White, but that tells me that they thought a guy off the street was better than Mike White, who at least Chris Greer has to be part of that equation. He's a guy they thought was going to be the backup quarterback coming in. I mean, he had a full 2 off seasons with this team. They had all kinds of directions they could have went in the off season, but they had to think, somebody did in the evaluation process, that Mike White was going to be our backup quarterback. And he was terrible in the preseason. He's gone, and that's what leads you to starting a guy off the street again in Tyler Huntley. And so I don't think a lot of people are talking about the depth issue, but it's just, it blows my mind the amount of guys that are playing on this football team and being relied on at critical times to make plays that haven't even been on the team very long. It's shocking.
So we've kind of had this conversation in post games prior to, and maybe it was a bit premature at those points to have these kinds of conversations. But I think all three of us are in agreement that it is time to start having some of these conversations now. At 2-5, let's just be honest. 2-6.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Is it time to make those changes? Is it time to press that button when it comes to Greer or McDaniel or both? I don't know where everyone would fall on that side of the spectrum. I don't even know where I really fully fall on that at this point in time. But I think it's extremely fair to question, okay, well, you know, Mike McDaniel did a really good job of implementing, you know, kind of this Shanahan system-esque offense with, you know, some of his own personal touches. I get it. But you see it in Green Bay, you see it in LA, you see it everywhere else. And I don't want to fault him for this, because I do think that there are reasons for this, and it looked really good in 2022 and 2023. But right now, I think we can easily, it's fair to say he has had by far the least success of any of the other head coaches off the Shanahan tree at this point. And Chris Greer to your point, Chad, guys are being young players are being bypassed by aging veterans that are just on other teams' practice squad or guys that you're signing off the street. I hadn't even really thought of that too much, but it's a really good point when you make about a Mo Kamara, or any other number of players that the Dolphins have had to just, oh, we're just gonna patchwork this thing in here. You put 2.5 years into Skylar Thompson for what? Um, it just, it's all part of a trend. The trend has been consistent at this point, and I think it's fair to ask those questions of what comes next for the Dolphins in the bigger picture. Is Chris Greer still here? Is Mike McDaniel still here? Are you guys where are you guys on this? I'll start with you, Coach Eric. I know that you don't like having these kinds of conversations in the moment, but I think you'll agree at this point. It's fair to have it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair that you have to start talking about it when you see the same issues over and over again, and you see a undisciplined team, right? At some point, that has to come back to the head coach. I think that some of the players, we talk about the ones coming off the street, like the Tyus Bowser thing, I think was a guy that was familiar with the system type thing. And I can see that as why, they would bring him in over a Mo Kamara. But, there's plenty of those examples. Like, I'm not saying that's not an issue. There was a misevaluation of the depth that they had in the outside linebacker room. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the outside linebacker that was starting all through camp that we haven't seen during the regular season. Was it Quentin something?
Quentin Bell is who you're talking about.
Quentin Bell. There we go. Yeah. Like, he started all through camp. Like, where has he been? Like, I get that we haven't got Bradley Chubb back. We lost Jalen Phillips. So I think that Chop Robinson's being pressed into more than what he should be asked to do. And I agree completely with Chad that he is not a good run defender. I think that him being on the field in this game had more to do with trying to have somebody that could chase around Kyler Murray, because if you don't have him out there, then what do? You bump Calais Campbell out to defensive end with Emmanuel Ogbah on the other side, and then you have nobody on the field that can chase him. So I think that, a player like Chop is being pressed into playing because of injuries, but we keep having that conversation as well. Players playing before they shouldn't or where they shouldn't because of injuries is just a continuous ongoing thing. I don't know if there is any benefit to making a in-season move. There's obviously no reason to fire Greer in the middle of the season. I don't think it really has an effect on anything at this point. As far as McDaniel goes, if you fire McDaniel, then what options do you have? Do you promote Weaver to head coach, who's only been here for a few months, and then you have Frank Smith call the offense? I don't think you can fire McDaniel and put Frank Smith as the head coach and have him also call the offense, because that's another guy that hasn't called offenses. So I don't even know who you would have call the offense. So I think that even though, I don't have a whole lot of hope for the season, I think that the next few games are a very important part of what could happen later in the season. If things continue to just completely fall off the rails, I don't see any way that you can bring back McDaniel and Greer. If they manage to bounce back and make it competitive, then maybe, probably against the wishes of many fans, maybe they buy themselves another year, going back to the adversity of not having the quarterback for 4 or 5 weeks, whatever that was. Maybe that buys them another year if they can rebound and finish strong. But I'm not overly optimistic that that's going to be the case. Like, at this point, I fully expect a blowout next week. And, I still don't know how McDaniel's going to do with a locker room that starts to fall apart, because they do have a lot of strong personalities in that locker room that are not going to like losing. So, if they don't figure out a way to turn it around, then I think that there's going to be a lot of very vocal people in the locker room. And for all the reasons that people liked McDaniel when he was first brought in, you know, being a leader in the locker room, that strong personality in the locker room to control those type of personalities, I don't think was among the top of those characteristics. So I think that, you know, for Stephen Ross, seeing how these next, you know, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 weeks pan out, I think will go a long way to determining what happens in this offseason.
Just to counter that, because I know that you said not sure what firing Chris Greer would do in the you know, in the season for the team.
Yep.
Is there any thought that you would want to get that kind of evaluation of the roster period kind of started a little bit sooner than later for anyone new that comes in? Just for that alone, not necessarily because, you know, they're going to come in and start making moves right away, but I do think that there might be, you know, a little bit of a good idea of just letting that evaluation period start sooner rather than later. But Chad, I want to go to you on this here between Greer and McDaniel, kind of this whole era or this regime, this brain trust that the Dolphins have developed. Are you fired Greer, fire McDaniel, fire neither, fire both? Where are we at 2 and 6?
Well, I mean, it'd be nice if I had some inside information to know, like, because to me, there's some accountability that if I'm Stephen Ross, I'm bringing in Mike McDaniel in my office, and I'm bringing Chris Grimm office, and I'm asking very directly, who made the decisions on the quarterback position? Like, who thought Mike White was a good quarterback? Because you can walk around any fan base in the league, social media, scouts, and nobody would have told you Mike White's a good quarterback or Skylar Thompson. And so my question, if I'm Ross, would have been, who is pushing for the quarterbacks that we have? Because our quarterback has only completed one full season, like what, since his junior year of college last year. So Tua has struggled to stay healthy. And so you've got to be thinking, we've got to have at least a top 64 quarterback to back him up, not guys that couldn't even make other teams' practice squads. And so not knowing the answer to that, was Chris Greer adamantly saying we need to go get somebody else, that Mike McDaniel was overruling him? Or was this those guys in unison? And how that would be one question I would have. Is that at the end of the day, that's what has ruined the season, was they didn't have a competent backup quarterback. Personally, I would not fire Mike McDaniel right now. Some things are his fault, some aren't. I don't know where he's at in the personnel. I would fire Chris Greer right now. And the only way the season can go right now is Stephen Ross needs to step up, which he typically doesn't do. But Stephen Ross needs to come in and say, okay, we're done. I am understanding. I have 2 eyeballs right now. This team is not a Super Bowl contender, not remotely close. And we have a lot of players right now that aren't going to be part of the future of this team. And so this is not going to be easy in the locker room. You're probably going to lose the locker room, and you need to decide, do I want to let Mike McDaniel suffer through that and decide after the season? But players like right now, where you need to get on the phone, is Calais Campbell can help a team that's in a Super Bowl run right now. Teron Armstead can help a team in a Super Bowl run right now. They are the best players we have at those respective positions. They need traded off because they're not going to be part of the 2025-2026 Dolphins. And you need to if you can get a 6th-round picks for Calais Campbell right now, you take it. And to say, because we understand this team is not going to be competitive, because Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel aren't going to make those trades because they're trying to save their jobs. And they know if I get rid of Calais Campbell, we're going to get even worse. If I get rid of Teron Armstead, we're going to get even worse. And I'm looking at like, yeah, I'm not worried about winning anymore. I'm worried about Patrick Paul getting as many reps as possible. I want as many young guys to get reps as possible right now, because I'm trying to get the best 2025 team I can get on the field. And that means we need picks, because we're going to have to we should probably consider using a 1st-round pick on a quarterback. And you have to take a long look at the situation and say, Tua Tagovailoa is no longer our franchise quarterback. He's the best quarterback we have right now. But if your plan is he's going to be the quarterback for the next decade, you're living in a pipe dream. Like, you're going to be lucky if you get 3 more years out of Tua, because he's one bad concussion away every time from being done. And you can't go into next year and say, well, we're going to count on Tua and not have a really good option at backup. And you can't go get good quarterbacks to be your backup quarterback for what they cost. You got to consider go investing a first round pick in a quarterback, which means we need as many draft picks as we can get right now to try to get this team right. And would you trade like a Tyreek Hill or something like that? Maybe. I don't think they are very tradable for what you'll get back. And Tyreek Hill's young enough that he could be part of this team for a couple more years and part of the success of this team. So I wouldn't be in a hurry to trade away the superstar players like that. But again, there's several players on this team that have value that you have to start considering right now. Like, is David Long Jr. the future at linebacker on this team? He's a good player. He's in his mid to late 20s. Can you get a decent pick for that guy right now? Because you could accumulate a lot of picks right now if you fire sale this team. But that means, as Stephen Ross, you got to give up attendance. You got to realize people aren't going to come to the games anymore if you sell off. And you got to realize you're going to lose the locker room. But send Chris Greer packing. I don't understand why you would continue to keep Chris Greer right now. And Mike McDaniel, I'm probably going to decide after the season. Like, there's got to be, if Danny Crossman keeps his job after this year, that's just stunning to me. Like, we've had the worst special team unit in the league for years, or a bottom team, and keeping these guys just isn't possible. So Chris Greer is probably going to need to bring somebody in. Can you go get like a Louis Riddick right now, get him in the building, and start planning for 2025 and 2026 while you still have, prior to the trade deadline, and can get value out of these guys?
I think my argument against that, and the reason I say that there's no benefit to getting rid of Chris Greer now is because, in my opinion, if I were Stephen Ross, then those two would be tied together. If I am firing Chris Greer, then I'm not keeping McDaniel. I'm tired of doing these half-ass rebuilds where we fire the GM or we fire the head coach and we hang on to the other guy, and then 2 or 3 years down the road we're doing the exact same thing. I'm not against firing them, but I don't like the idea of bringing in a GM and saying, hey, you're going to give Mike McDaniel another year and a half to see whether or not he's the guy. I feel like if you are firing Chris Greer, then you're firing Mike McDaniel also. You bring in a new GM, you let that GM pick the head coach that he wants, you let them build the team in the vision that they want, instead of bringing in a GM who is trying to build the team in the vision of Mike McDaniel. Because I think that, the further we get into this, the more that it feels like it is a mistake that Chris Greer is catering to the head coaches. I forget who it was that kind of pointed this out, but it should be that the GM, yes, you got to take input from your coaches, but the GM should be the guy that is driving the entire vision. And he should be telling the head coach, making those decisions and saying, hey, these are our best players. You need to figure out how to win with them. And that way we're keeping the best players in the building. We're not keeping the ones that the head coach has a relationship with. We're not sacrificing where the head coach feels like we should. That's just my opinion. That's why I say that, I don't see a point in firing Greer now, because if I'm firing Greer, then I'm firing all of them and I'm burning it all down. And I'm not quite ready to do all of that and have the fire sale today. And unfortunately, I probably wouldn't be before the trade deadline and being able to do that. But when it gets to that point, for me, they're both gone.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that there would be time. It would be just too quick of a turnaround for any kind of new GM to come in and start making those kinds of deals right away. Especially when, you consider that there are probably other executives that you would want to come in underneath the GM that go into those decision-making processes. My question to you then would be, okay, let's say you're Stephen Ross right now. You are interviewing a prospective GM candidate, and I'm not sure what the order would be. Would you have somebody lined up before firing a Chris Greer? I would assume that, there might not be that. He's done it before with the whole Harbaugh thing.
Yeah, you start those conversations. Everybody starts those conversations before they actually pull the trigger.
True. But let's say you're talking to a Lewis Riddick, and you say, okay, who is your ideal head coach for this team? And he says, well, I wouldn't mind giving Mike a year. Is he crossed off the list at that point if it's an organic thought by the GM?
I guess not. I mean, that would be the GM choosing who they want. So I guess not. But I don't see many GMs coming in and seeing what they have done in terms of discipline and saying that they would want to tie their rig to Mike McDaniel also.
Yeah, I don't think he would. To me, if the GM, you're moving Chris Greer out now if you're willing to focus on the future. Because the problem I have is Chris Greer is not going to, because he's going to try to save his job.
Right.
So he's going to want to play the best veteran players to try to eke out 7 wins and maybe feel like, well, look, we won 4 straight, even though we're going to finish with 7 wins, 8 wins, and not make the playoffs. And to me, with a new GM, if you have a candidate you really like, but let's using Lewis Riddick as an example and just say we're planning on keeping McDaniel. It's your call at the end of the year. This is a tryout for McDaniel for you. If he's not your guy and you want to move on, that's fine. This is your show. We're trying to build a team, and somebody like Lewis Riddick has nothing tied to the current team, and he'd be like, all right, I'm going to pick up the phone and we're going to start wheeling and dealing. And you just got to understand, like you're going to either roll with Chris Greer or not, but I just don't see what good he's going to do in season right now. Whereas McDaniel, I'm not sold that he should be fired. I'm not there with him yet. Again, because I don't know who made the personnel decisions on this team without being behind closed doors. Now, if Mike McDaniel was who pushed Chris Greer for a lot of these guys, like, no, I want Eric Exicoma on this team. I want Mike White on this team. I want Skylar Thompson. Then I'm going to be maybe a little more, if I'm Stephen Ross, saying, yeah, maybe it's time to move on from him because he clearly can't evaluate players. That would be the feel I would get, because there's a gap somewhere in player evaluation, because again, I don't expect Eric Exicoma to come in and be a dominant player. I don't expect Mohamed Kamara to come in and be a dominant player. I do expect, if they're on my roster all offseason, for them at least to be a backup caliber player. And they're not. I mean, at least that's not what the Dolphins are thinking, and they're moving on from them. And so, and it doesn't look, I mean, the move of letting Andrew Van Ginkel go and going and drafting Chop Robinson looks bad right now, because if you had kept Andrew Van Ginkel and maybe drafted a Graham Barton or even a quarterback or something, we'd be so much further ahead. And at some point, if you're Stephen Ross, you got to put the accountability somewhere on the personnel, and it's got to be ending with Chris Greer right now. So I don't know, unless you can convince Chris Greer to work on some trades. But I guess from my mindset, I feel like the season's done. I don't think this team is going to make the playoffs. I don't know where I put all the faults at, but I do know our best chance to get better is to start accumulating as many picks as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of an unfortunate situation to where Greer is kind of in this lame duck spot, because there are genuinely guys that, while I agree, I see people in the comments saying trade Ramsey, trade Tyreek. I don't even think he really could and get the kind of value you would want to at this point. Like, it's just not realistic at this point. But to your point, Calais Campbell, is he even going to be playing football next year? Whatever you can get for him, you take it. David Long, he's on, I believe he's next year would be the last year of his current contract. You deal him. Just guys that are not going to be part of the longer term future for this team. Yeah. And it's, again, I wouldn't necessarily even touch the quote unquote core pieces, because I think that is the job of the new GM to evaluate what exactly needs to be done with the nucleus of this roster. But I do think that there's a lot of, they can kind of trim the fat along the edges here, and get picks for the really obvious situations. Is there are the Dallas Cowboys desperate enough for the running back that they'll send you a 6 for Raheem Mostert at this point, because he's 32 years old? Is he going to be on the roster next year? I don't know. Probably not. There's just a bunch of guys that are kind of in that box, to where Sure, are they day 3 picks? Do they move the needle for you a ton? No, but those are the picks that become ammunition for you to move up in day 2 or early in day 3, for guys that you want that can be difference makers down the line. So I think that's probably a wise thing, and it's unfortunate Greer wouldn't be the one. Well, I mean, it's fortunate that he's not the one making those moves because I don't want him making any more moves. But just the idea that I think the trade deadline is going to come and go with some of these opportunities missed, might not be, franchise shattering in that it sets them back 3-4 years. But I do think that it's just going to be a missed opportunity that some of these veteran players, especially a guy like Calais Campbell, because it's less about at this point, if the Dolphins lose and you go to 2-6, which I think we all agree that that's the most likely scenario, at least next Sunday. At some point, it becomes about doing right by, a guy who's been in the league 17 years, and been a consummate professional. Send him back to Baltimore to let him go on one more run, something like that. It's just unfortunate that as a lame duck GM, Greer isn't going to do it. I do think that if I had to take a guess, if things don't turn around drastically in the next 3 weeks, I think something happens in season. I know we had that reporting last week of I think it was Greer, Ross, and Garfinkel leaving the coach's locker room after the game last week. I don't think that there's nothing to that. I think that they are having those kind of closed door, what are we going to do about this kind of conversations. And it's just another season of better luck next year. The Dolphins continue on this hamster wheel of eke into the playoffs for a couple of years, let the wheels fall off, fire the head coach or GM, hire another one of the two, make a mismatch brain trust and fire it up. I do agree with Coach Eric, I think, at this point, where my issue with Mike McDaniel at this point is, and I think that he's a decent play designer as an offensive mind. And I think he's exactly who you would want your position coach to be. He believes in his guys fiercely. He's going to advocate for them at every turn, but I don't know how well that translates to being a head coach, when sometimes you kind of have to be that guy that's just a little bit more forceful with your players, and I don't know if he can do that. He just kind of strikes me as the guy that's the assistant to the guy. I think he was I think his role in San Francisco was, at least at this point in his career, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the line, he becomes that guy, he develops into it, grows into it. But this team can't wait on that with Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I agree with that. There was a point earlier in the season when McDaniel, got out there on the podium. I think he talked about making changes, and then we got to the next week or the next game, and everything was exactly the same. Basically the only thing that changed was that he said that he was going to call a better game, and that's not good enough. Like, when you're a head coach and things aren't going well, like, you have to make changes. You have to hold people accountable, and you can't have the performances that we've had so far this season and not have anybody losing their job. I'm not even saying he has to go out there and have a, Adam Gase cut 3 guards in the same week type day, but somebody should be demoted, right? Somebody should be, losing playing time, right? Somebody needs to move to the practice squad. Somebody needs to not be activated that has been, like, and I don't know that McDaniel has that in him, because that McDaniel is always going to see what he thinks it should be and what it could be versus what it is right now. I think that the role that he had in San Francisco and in Atlanta before that as the run game coordinator, I think that is the perfect position for him. You said that he's a good play designer. I would take that a step above. Like his play designs, I think, are probably above average compared to the league. But the problem is that he does not seem to do a good job with game flow and calling a game. He does not seem to do those, personnel things that you'd expect from a head coach. So, I think that the perfect position for him is, hey, you're the run game coordinator. You get to design all these plays, right? You can give your inputs. You can contribute to the game plan. The offensive coordinators call from a play call sheet during the game where you're practicing that stuff all week. You're finding out what you think is going to work. And McDaniel, when he was in San Francisco, had a big role in that. But when it comes actual game day, you're not the one calling the plays. You're not the one, making the personnel decisions, that type of thing. And I think that was a very good position for McDaniel. I think that the hiring of McDaniel, they hope that would translate into somebody that could, call a good game offensively. And I don't feel like that development has happened with McDaniel. And, we talk about development with players all the time. And, at what point do you say that, they're just not going to develop into what you want them to be? And that's kind of where I am with McDaniel right now. That if we were, if there was a world where McDaniel would give up play calling and still be part of the play design, I think that there could be a benefit to it, but I don't see him doing that as the head coach because he's always going to feel like he's the smartest guy in the room. He's not going to feel that somebody else can call his game plan better than what he can. So I think that he's, if he doesn't work out here, I see him going somewhere else and I see him being very successful, but I don't think that it's going to be as a head coach if it doesn't work out here.
And I want to address something that I see in the comments here because I see, Vent putting in that this is the most talented roster in Dolphins history. Maybe the top 10% or the top 20% of the roster is as talented as any Dolphins team has ever been, but there's 53 guys on the roster. Jalen Ramsey, Jalen Phillips, Javon Holland, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Does not a team make. You need talent everywhere, and you need to maximize the back end of the draft. And that's just something that Chris Grier has not done to this point. He just hasn't. Mo Kamara, he's a miss. This year he hasn't affected things this year. Maybe down the line he's a decent player, but the point being here is when you create this kind of team where you are capped out and you have all of your guys locked up, you've spent all the money, you need to be really good at building along the margins. And that's just where Chris Grier completely fails. He's good when he has the monopoly money and he has everything to spend and he has those first round picks to go get Tyreek Hill, but he's not. He can't maximize minimal resources. He can make a lot happen when you give him a lot of resources, or he can make a good amount happen when you give him a lot of resources, but he doesn't maximize when he's in a position to where, there's just not much. I mean, and I know the offensive line is maligned and maybe rightfully so, maybe not. But I look at the middle of this year's draft this past year. I look at Cooper Beebe. I look at Dominic Puny. I look at some of those guys around the league, and those guys are having really fantastic rookie seasons, to where they would be really solid upgrades over what the Dolphins have right now. I don't see how there's any defending Chris Grier at this point, because even in a world where he is just listening to his head coaches, if you're just listening to your head coaches, then to quote the I don't remember his name, but the character in Office Space, the boss, what is it exactly that you do here? If you're just listening to your coaches, then why not just make them the GMs at that point? Because you have to be the guy to say, no, this is my roster. I'm going to I'll take suggestions. I'm not a dictator, but I have the ultimate final say here. Mm-hmm. And if he's not willing to do that, then he's not willing to be an executive at the highest level.
Well, and again, it's a lot of it's accountability where you got to go back up to Ross's level now, because whose idea was it to go with OBJ? I mean, he's had zero impact, and he's hurt the team in the standpoint that we haven't had a receiver there. Who was it? Eskridge this week? It's every week it's somebody different that's catching a pass. It's not Odell Beckham Jr. And like, whose idea was it that Isaiah Wynn was a good answer at guard? I mean, he hasn't even dressed for a practice. And so, like, is this a failure on our medical staff? Who did the evaluations on that and thought it was a good move? And so there's just been a lot of like misses in my point for Chris Grier. And you're pointing out, but like, I could do that. You could hire me right now and I can tell you Tyreek Hill's good. Jalen Ramsey's good. I know they're good. They're stars. Why is Channing Tindall never playing? Like, you could go down all these picks that are the mid-range picks where you need these guys to start and be good players, and we don't get that. And that's where it's like, I think at some point you just got to say this isn't where it's at. Like, this Chris Grier has failed on an evaluation standpoint at some level, because this team is a talented. We've lost to one football team this year that's better than the Dolphins, in my opinion. I think the Titans are a really bad team. The Colts are not a good football team. The Cardinals are not a good football team. We haven't even been playing good football teams yet. And so I think you got to get those calls. Like right now, the Minnesota Vikings have a legitimate chance to compete for a Super Bowl this year. They just lost their left tackle. Go to Teron Armstead. Do you want to try to win a Super Bowl? Should we work something out with the Vikings? Let's get you shipped up to Minnesota. You'll have a chance to play with a really good football team. We need to get Patrick Paul reps anyway. Even if it's a 6th round pick, all right, it can cut some of his salary cap down. Those are the decisions that need to be made before this trade deadline hits. Really right now, because you put Teron Armstead out there against Buffalo, he's going to go out and like tear his shoulder or something, be done for the year. You're just waiting for that shoe to drop with Teron Armstead anyway. So if you can get value out of him right now, this is the time, to get those guys moved. And I could, why are you keeping Raheem Mostert? I know he's a locker room favorite. I know he's a team leader, but Jalen Wright needs to be on the field. I mean, he looks good. And what did he get? 3 carries today? And there was a couple times when I was watching it with my son, I'm like, I think Wright would have got the corner there and Mostert didn't get the corner. It's just because he's faster. And it's like, yeah, Dallas could really use him. So you go to Raheem Mostert and say, hey, look, we're going to try to get you off to a contender right now, whoever that is. And we'll get whatever we can out of them. And even if you accumulate like 3 or 4 6th round picks, maybe you can package them together to help you move up to get something in this draft right now. So anyway, I don't think there's anybody else in this organization that can do that right now other than Stephen Ross. And what is Stephen Ross right now? Is he 84, 85? I'm not sure what his age is, but he's getting to the end of never having won a playoff game in his entire tenure as the owner. And so I would think his leash has to be pretty short right now, because his leash on life is getting pretty short. Do you want to try to win a playoff game at least or not? Because I don't know. Like, to me, if Stephen Ross just leaves everything in place, that's a recipe for a 7-win season right now.
Well, I think this would be a good spot to wrap up here. We're kind of getting, caught up into a feedback loop where, we're firing Chris Grier and McDaniel repeatedly at this point. Right. We will have more to talk about on Tuesday night. Lewis out sick with the flu. Hope he gets better in time for Pulse of Fins Nation on Tuesday night at 7:30 as normal. Also be out on the lookout for the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast upcoming this week, as well as Coach Eric's show with Hussam Patel over the upcoming week as well. Also, remember to use promo code 5 with Prize Picks for a $50 bonus play on, or $50 in bonus funds on your first lineup of $5 or more, as well as go to Jerseys 305, do all that good stuff. We will see you guys next time. I don't know where we go from here. Hopefully, we get just moments of fun in this season. I just want moments at this point.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it gets better at some point this season. We will see you guys next time, and we will be here through the good, bad, and the ugly. Thanks, guys. We are out.